Welcome to Crowning, where birthing is a portal to your power. That was my first intro. I knew the exact comment was going to be okay intro. And if you could feel the 80s vibe, my name's Siobhan, first of all. And this is both the premiere of Crowning and also a vision come true. And that's my first background, is that this whole thing is inspired by like 80s talk shows, which is a dream that I've had since childhood, to host a little talk show. So that's what we're doing today. Welcome. I already see my beloveds in the chat, and thank you so much for showing up to support my first stream. My goal for this stream is to be pretty casual, but since it's the first one, there's a little bit more structure and more background necessary, and we're just kind of vibing today. I really want this to be the weekly spot for connecting around birthing, to answer questions around birthing. And even if you don't plan to birth yourself, or if you already have and you don't plan to have more children, my ultimate goal here, like I said, is to look at birthing as a portal to our power, to look at the creative process as a way to practice being in our power, as this playground for our power. And whether that means you are preparing down the line for a pregnancy or you just want to be more informed, I fully believe this is something that we need to be more informed about. Yeah, everybody's here. Everyone that's here already knows me and knows that I am a big advocate for being in our power. I know that my audience is very politically aware, is also spiritually attuned, or at least spiritually curious. So this is a place for us. Thanks for being here. And I'm going to give you a little rundown of how we're going to move through this stream, because I really wanted this to be a place where not only am I answering questions, but I also want to show how I answer questions, because my story as a doula begins when I'm following giving birth myself. So I've been answering questions, and just spoiler alert, no one submitted questions to the hotline today, but I think that's actually a good thing, because I have 5+ years of answering everybody's questions. So I know the common questions that people have when it comes to birthing and parenting. And the one today that we're going to really get into is the location of birthing. So we're going to save that for kind of the second part of the show, because like I said, there's a lot of other background, and I'm just going to like be very sharing every aspect of how I'm considering walking through this. And it's going to have a lot of screen sharing, looking at articles, because I think one thing that we tell people a lot, especially since 2020, is do your own research. And in a place, I'm in the US, that's important, where there is a lot of energy and money put into us being propagandized, essentially, or not able to do our own research, I feel like that's pretty empty advice. So we're going to be looking at the latest in reproductive justice and wellness news, reading through those articles together, and then I'm going to answer your questions. So if you're here live and you do have a question for me, the Spirit Doula, you can look in the link or in the description of this video, and there's a form there, and you can submit your questions there. And you can also drop them in the chat here, but in the forum's preferred, so I can just make sure I do it justice, send it on over after, so you get your full question answered. And let's start with just me slowing down, because I feel like I'm talking really fast, and that's just the excitement of a new stream. And honestly, I was just cracking up at the intro, because it just was giving 80s opening, and that's what, yeah, I'm just having fun with it. Oh my gosh, thank you everyone for showing up today. So before I get started, I'm going to share with y'all my rainbow of readiness. Now, most of y'all here have been to soft power spaces. And when you join my soft power spaces, which if you aren't familiar with Church of Soft Power, I'm a co-founder of a lay-led church for the spirits of creativity. And that was founded through a discovery of the intersection of birthing coming from myself, the arts field coming from Midori, Kiki coming from academia and voice work, flow coming from somatics and ancestral trauma and trauma in the body. And really, through forming a friendship, gathering, and doing somatic practices together, we discovered that really we're all talking about the same thing, using different languages. So, my language that I brought to the Church of Soft Power was really around not only birthing, but also space holding as a doula. And for those that don't know, a doula is a support person for the cycles of life, most typically in the reproductive cycles. So we are people that are resources, we are people that are space holders. And I became a doula after the birth of my son in 2018. And that's a big, big influence over my entire path and why I want to share this show this way, because I had a lot of information, but what I didn't have was trust in myself, trust in my intuition, and the ability to actually follow through and take this information and apply it to my life and to be in my power of what I knew. I was still giving my power away and surrendering to who I perceived to have more authority in that scenario. And that ended up with a very traumatic birth experience, a stay in the NICU for my son, which is the neonatal ICU. And from there, I began to talk more to other people who've given birth, people in my own family, and chatting with my friends who were giving birth around the same time and finding out just how common it was. So that sent me into a whole information, I don't know, journey. And what I uncovered was really fucking dark. And we're going to just slowly seed that throughout the experience of crowning. Because, as the graphic here says, here on this side, I want to make sure that we're ready to actually receive. I don't know if my camera is like mirroring or what for y'all. Anyways, I want to make sure that we're actually able to receive this stuff because it is traumatic. And a big way that these institutions and industrial complexes are able to kind of shove us through this machine is by letting us be fearful, letting us not believe in ourselves. As I said, there are so many there's an intricate engineering to us not believing in ourselves, us not trusting our inner voices. And right now, in this moment, January 14th, 2026, in the United States, we are really experiencing the catalyst. I don't know that we're experiencing the crowning moment yet. And so, if you don't know what the crowning moment is, that is in birth when the baby's head becomes visible, when the crown of their head is able to be seen descending from the cervix. And they call that the crowning. For my spiritual folks, you may know the crown as the seventh chakra, that is our connection to higher spirituality and the collective, and this perception that we are connected to all things. Crowning, also very simply, we may have all been introduced to that word through the concept of like being crowned as a royal, as a queen. And while I am anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, and not here for placing anybody on a hierarchy or a throne, I'm also a big believer in you being the empress, the ruler of your own household, of your own family. And that's really my goal here, is to provide both just like the energetic connection and the redirection back to our own selves, being in our power, because we really need all of us to rise as the leaders and ruler archetypes of our own lives, of our bodies, of our families. And I believe that leadership, and the like number one skill of leadership we need right now is our creativity, which just like brought us all full circle back to birthing. So with this graphic, this is kind of my adaptation from where I in our spaces would say like, where are y'all at today on a 1 to 5? 1 being really low, 5 being like energizing great. I'm reframing that entirely. I never like fully loved that. I just needed something to like gauge where people were at. But I revisited accountability mapping, which is this course by a wonderful somatic educator and facilitator named Daria, who has a background in traditional Chinese medicine, qigong, Chinese astrology, and their work is about accountability through the body and how to build our resilience with taking accountability and being accountable for our lives. And so that really resonates with me as a Asian American, as a Filipino and Irish American person. And what they introduced me to was the work of Lindsay Brahman and Dan Siegel, who put forward this idea of the window of tolerance as well as then the rainbow of tolerance. And I have adapted this now into what I'm calling the rainbow of readiness. So, in the rainbow of readiness, it's looking and thinking about our nervous system experience. I'll do a little more. If you have questions about the nervous system, you can drop those on the hotline, but I think that will probably come in within the next few episodes because it's really important. And in this rainbow, I'm breaking out of my prior framework of a more linear 1 being low, 5 being high, to 1 being underactivated, maybe a understimulation of the nervous system, to 5 being overactivated, heightened anxiety, and more sped up. I'm probably at a 4 right now, so we're gonna just like breathe for a moment after this to bring me closer to a 3. But 2 to 4 is a great range. In what I learned from accountability mapping, they offer a 1 to 10, in which 1 is very, very underactivated to the point that kind of in the like emergency or attention needed, support needed area. But just knowing the way that we connect here, my guess is that no one's showing up for this. That's more like a healthcare, I feel like, necessity. Here, you're watching a YouTube stream. So I call it collective care media. In soft power, we call them our collective care, creative care gatherings. So let me know in the chat where you might be at today on this 1 to 5 rainbow, because we're not going to be doing much subconscious work, somatic work like we would do sometimes in our private spaces or one-on-one spaces. But depending on your identities, some of this information, especially when we get into the history of childbirth in the US and the topics of reproductive justice, can be super activating. It's really upsetting stuff. It's really dehumanizing stuff. This country was founded on, and this is even putting it gently, but the commodification, buying and selling of humans. And most of us know here that it's so much fouler than that. So yeah, with that said, this is my premiere of the Rainbow of Readiness. So, it's just meant to help you assess for yourself if you're ready to even engage with these type of topics. And if you're not right now, that is totally fine. I just made this graphic today. So I think I want to probably build this out more of like what to do if you're at that lower or higher end. What other ways can you bring yourself into this centered place of your nervous system? Because nice. I'm seeing a 4 there. Yeah, vibing high because you had drama club Wednesdays. Yeah, so this is still like the perfect center. We're never here to be perfect. And my whole point with a lot of this is that we're not actually intended to always be regulated. My goal by doing practices to bring us to a place of centeredness, to access where it says here optimal functioning and growth, the place where growth can happen is so that we can grow and expand our capacity so that the next time we are activated, we might have an increased capacity to be able to navigate that in the moment. And that really is how I believe we become the rulers of our lives, how we crown ourselves as the authorities in our lives is our ability to retain our power and to retain perception of what we have control over when it comes to these moments. And then there will be moments where we necessarily get overactivated, and giving birth is one of them. To be able to give birth, you need to be able to let yourself be activated and surrender to your breath and the moment. And where we're at, just as a culture, is just a society and an overculture of constant overactivation, where we have just brought into imbalance. So these kind of things that were so, and that's, I'm already thinking how I want to get into the whole like background of the nervous system, because it's very fascinating to see like how many hundreds of thousands of years ago each like kind of area of it developed. But I'm going to hold off there. Um, yeah, twos. Ooh, eating pandesal. Yum. And if you don't have water, let's take a sip of water right now. Highly recommend grabbing snacks to just take this in. And I'm going to just start shaking a little bit. And today, just going to keep the somatic practice very simple, very light. Obviously, plug to the Church of Soft Power and Soft Power TV if you need more thorough practices, especially Soul Bloom's channel is very dedicated to energy work. And I do her Qigong videos like many days of the week. So I'm just going to shake off and invite us just into a few minutes of connecting with the breath. And so wherever you're at, let's just take a pause, maybe close your eyes if that's comfortable, or just stand with your feet planted on the ground wherever you're at, and allow yourself to be present for just 1 minute, taking a breath in and exhaling, imagining all of that energy rushing down to the ground, sending it out from your body to the earth, who is eager to receive it. And on this breath, let it go as far as you comfortably can, taking a pause before breathing in through the nose, the freshest breath you've taken today. And I'm feeling called to walk us through, I'm blanking on what to call it, but it's a spiral learned through Taoist mystic practices. And so in this next breath, I'm going to invite you to inhale up, imagining the breath coming up into your lower area around your pelvic floor, around your womb space. Everyone has one, no matter the gender. And as that breath comes up, swirling around, imagining like it's just in like the bowl of your pelvis, swirling and exhaling it down back to the earth. Now on your next breath, it's going to come up towards the heart, towards this upper space, the space of our courage, and breathing up, feeling it rush up the back of our spine, swirling, bringing energy and energetic motion into our chest, through our lungs, through our rib cage. And again, exhaling down anything it's collected in its spiral and releasing that back to the earth. And on this third intentional breath, I imagine you've taken other breaths in between, but release this next breath. And on the third one, it's going to come up through the back of our spine, up our neck, all the way up to the crown of our head, swirling, imagining a gentle, supportive, not quite tornado, but a gust of energy swirling through your skull, picking up any thoughts that don't belong to you, that are distracting you from presence in this moment, as you exhale them down the front of your body and send them down to the earth. And I'm just going to take a couple more breaths, giving gratitude. Gratitude for this moment. So much gratitude for the presence and support of everyone that's here. When I ground, oftentimes I immediately feel tears well in my eyes, mostly because I'm a Cancer sun and Mercury, and that's just, I have perpetually watery eyes. And just feeling the presence, I see like 6 people on there. I see people that I really love and care for in the chat here, whether it's just to support me on this premiere day or to gain something for yourself. It always means a lot to be with y'all. And yeah, Heaven, your streaming game is so fun. So yeah, this is like way more structured and jumbly than I would want to, than I probably will be in the future sessions. But it's also just kind of fun to be, I guess, I don't know, to not have as much of an agenda as I normally do, for things like the soft power live events. And this is my own channel. Um, that's like, I don't know, it's just different. And it's a different, um, I feel prepared in a way that almost all of my personal work has been offline for a very long time. And there's personal things that I bring to soft power, but there's a co-regulation that my soft power family offers me when I do things online that this was like kind of my own little act of courage to make my own channel, do something that's just my voice, and to trust that it's gonna reach folks. So yeah, just really, really nice to have y'all here, and just goes to show, even when I'm prepared to go alone, I'm never actually alone. Okay, so now that we've kind of arrived, that was 23 minutes of arrival here. One thing I learned from streamers when I used to do Twitch that I don't know how to do on this one, but they always said like don't look at how many viewers you have. I mean, I've done streams before where I had 0 viewers, and it's always like a funny and kind of awkward thing to just like talk to yourself. And well, actually, not really. I talk to myself all the time, but in a streaming setting, to be witnessed and potentially talking to yourself is kind of fun. So let's see. Okay. So the main question here, yeah. Oops. Being leaky is beautiful. Love that. Looking at the viewer numbers. Let's see. Yeah, so what I wanted to get into today is this question of word of birth. And I think it's necessary before getting into all of that what I wanted to do today is give a little background on reproductive justice, because that is a framework here that that is really intentional. I think it is frequently misunderstood, and easily so, that reproductive justice is simply wanting justice in the reproductive realms, which it is at its simplest. But I want to pull up today the founders of the reproductive justice movement, which is Sister Song, a collective. And I kind of just want to go through this page together and let y'all see it for yourself. And like I said, this is kind of what I'm excited for, my little news desk. By the way, especially because my dad's here and he's Pace Corps CA. Uh, I want y'all to know that my talk show that I always envisioned since since being a kid myself. I was a kid once myself, and I also have a kid. Um, the name was Talk to Me, which to me is my last name prior to being married and will be once I'm no longer married, which I'm really close in that process or getting closer in that process. Um, TWOMEY. That was my show name. So this is a little of Talk to Me, okay? So, what is reproductive justice? It is, by definition, the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, the right to have children, to not have children, and to parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. So, this term was created in 1994. There was a gathering, a conference. It says right before attending the International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo, where the entire world agreed that the individual right to plan your own family must be central to global development. A group of Black women gathered in Chicago in June of 1994. They recognized that the women's rights movement, led by and representing middle class and wealthy white women, could not defend the needs of women of color and other marginalized women and trans people. And you'll see trans people that I'm really happy to say that was a push from, this is my like sidebar, that was a push from queer birth workers. King Ya is one that comes to mind specifically, who is, I think their handle was literally queer birth worker, who really was that voice to push for language inclusion and gender inclusivity in the reproductive justice movement. So to see this reflected here is actually already a pretty cool showing, because when I started my training as a doula in 2019, that actually was not reflected. So even me pulling this up today is actually a little bit of like revisiting back to the things that I was reading a lot about when I first decided to become a doula. And I see that those voices were heard by Sister Song, and they've now incorporated that into their language and their website. So, just a nice little nod of how this stuff is always changing, emerging, and that to me is the mark of leaders in the reproductive justice movement, because you gotta be open to other voices and changes. And surely there were trans people birthing in 1994. So just seeing now whose voices are being listened to and the willingness to evolve is just something also that I want to keep alive. So I want to read through these. We believe reproductive justice is a human right. It's based on the United Nations internationally accepted Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a comprehensive body of law that details the rights of individuals and the responsibilities of government to protect those rights. And, my mind already is going to all the ways that our human rights are being violated. The United Nations has lost a lot of credibility in the last few years, if you ask me, in terms of the hesitation and delay to call the genocide in Gaza a genocide. And just taking a moment for that, because as we look at movements and political movements, oftentimes people are left in the margins because the world may not be ready to include them. And I have really an opposite view, which is that that my view is shaped by being a reproductive justice trained birth worker, which is that we have to start with the people who are the most underrepresented, most marginalized, most under resourced, the most oppressed. And by prioritizing them and their needs, the rest of us are included automatically, and that there is no time to waste on including trans people, Black people, Palestinians, um, people in Sudan and the Congo. Um, I think that's something that feels really disappointing when I look at politics and party politics specifically, because there's this idea, and I just flat out think it's a lie at this point, that they're going to like inch their way out to include everybody else. And I could see why there is that belief, because there is a factor of what's going to get more people on board. But I think what the outcome has been is really like labeling the rest of us as like radical or ultra left, far left, when really it just kind of means like we're not willing to wait on including the people who need it most right now. So it needs to be said, mother of pearl, the birth realm, crowning. This is a place for all genders, and all of my childbirth education centers the needs of specifically Black and trans people and Indigenous people, and disabled people, and anyone whose identities fall outside of this white supremacist paradigm, which says that the people who deserve to give birth are thin, cisgender, white women, able bodied, often married. Um, Anything that doesn't fit into this colonial project, um, we experience now what the outcome of that is for these folks birthing in hospitals, even in just subconscious biases. They're something like a third. I'm going to have to pull the number and fact check myself later, but a significant number of, I'm going to actually just look it up right now. A significant number of first year med students believe that Black people do not have the same nerves and feel pain the same way, um, as white people. Let's see, about half in a 2016 study. Yeah, I was being generous with a third. Yeah, key findings of this 2016 study said that about 50% of white medical first year medical school students believe at least one myth about Black people's biology, such as having thicker skin and fewer nerve endings to not feel pain. So that's where we're at still. And that's really important to know when, as I'm like leading us into this conversation about where to choose to birth, how to choose where to birth. And that is, a large percentage of who are available to attend these things. And I think we're just going to like drop some reproductive justice history, because I could be here for hours getting into it all. But we're just going to have to see this out, because I also don't want to like make it entirely about that. But that's why I wanted to start with this about the reproductive justice movement, because I think next week I'll make a note for that to get a little more into the history of birthing in the US, because it is Black midwives who were the ones attending births in the US, enslaved midwives who brought this Afro Indigenous wisdom here, and were trusted, and were the only people trusted with attending births. They were also the only people trusted with caring for babies, which is why, sorry to say it, and I'm also a white person, but the fact that so many of the wealthiest childbirth educators are white women, from white American women who have only been caring for their own children for like barely 100 years. It's bullshit, honestly. And so my call to action at the end is going to be to donate to their birth fund here, at Sister Song, and I'll have those notes in the show notes, because um, that is who holds this knowledge, just like Indigenous people of these lands hold the knowledge for the land and the climate, and we need to give land back for that. It's just really going to the experts. And that's what's kind of phony a lot of times about people saying that they care about science when it comes to making their birth decisions. It's like, well, the science says give it to Indigenous people. The science would say trust Black midwives. That's just facts. So, you know, oh, the Empowered is in the house. Hello. Yeah, so Sister Songs, let's see. I want to read this here of what they said we must do to achieve reproductive justice, analyze power systems. Reproductive politics in the US is based on gendered, sexualized, and racialized acts of dominance that occur on a daily basis. And RJ works to understand and eradicate these nuanced dynamics. We must address intersecting oppressions. So, um, intersectionality, I believe, was a term made by Kimberly Crenshaw, I believe, which is looking at the multiplicities of identities that stack amongst each other and add more nuance to the situation. And they've got an Audre Lorde quote that says, "There's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." Boom. So, yeah, marginalized women face multiple oppressions, and we can only win freedom by addressing how they impact one another. We must center the most marginalized, yep, and join together across issues and identities. So, I will definitely have this in the show notes to look at um, these. Like I said, these are kind of like the future ancestors of reproductive justice in the US. And this other article I wanted to bring in for us today. Okay, how do I? Oh, we're going to learn how to switch tabs here. I guess you can. Shout out to StreamYard. The other article I want to get into before our question portion is this one here, because this came out the 5th of this year. And another reason I want to do this show is so that I'm also accountable to having a place to stay, to read and digest this information outside of just like on the blue, like bright blue light at 2 a.m, like crying about the state of birthing. So this is my soul sensitive place to digest the information for myself. And I briefly kind of scan through, but I also am trying to keep reading these things a little more alive so that, yeah, the reactions are genuine and we can just dig through it together. So this story is titled Leo Aquarius axis. Yeah, and that is where all my entire chart is on the Cancer, Leo, and Capricorn, Aquarius. It's just like right there on a line. So if that's not obvious, with the Sagittarius rising, shout out to my Sag risings in the house and Aquarius moons. Okay, freestanding birth centers are closing as maternity care gaps grow. So, reproductive justice history background or US history background on that is, like I said, births were always done in the home until really the rise of capitalism and the Industrial Revolution, where then hospitals really became businesses and births, an everyday event that was once overseen and tended to by Black midwives in the South specifically, is where who's credited. They call them granny. They were calling them granny midwives for a long time, but then Black leaders in the movement felt that that was still like still had tinges of racism and racial like stereotypes to be calling them grannies. So now they're often referred to as grand midwives. So the grand midwives would oversee birth, and then basically these doctors who now wanted to create a business under capitalism where hospitals again are businesses for profit, said, well, here is an everyday event that sometimes has emergencies, and if we move it to the hospital, then perfect. We have an everyday I don't know, way of making income. And so with that came charging for births in the hospital and spreading propaganda that the hospital was a better place to be birthing. And that is actually the first time and only time in history where white women were dying at faster rates, or at bigger, larger rates than Black women and people giving birth. And that's because um, they didn't really know how to manage this, and they were not washing their, as simple as they were not washing their hands going from bed to bed, bedside to bedside. These white men, these white physicians, did not have basic hygiene knowledge, and so yeah, women were dying in the hospitals. Then they kind of started to figure that out. White people discovered washing hands, and then they started to make laws to ban birthing outside of the hospital, and those laws still exist in many places. Many states still do not allow home birth. I'll have to look that up too on the specific ones. And I think about myself and as a Filipino American and the impacts of colonialism that are still alive in the Philippines, where there's still laws that you cannot birth outside of the hospital unless you live a certain distance from the hospital. Those are the only people who are allowed to. People who like typically live in the mountains or like very distant from civilization. Quote marks if you're just listening. Um, so back to the story here. Centers are confronting financial strain, restrictive regulations, and resistance from hospitals. So this was a big one. Dr. Heather Skanes opened the first freestanding birth center in 2022 in Birmingham, Alabama. Um, she is an OBGYN. She wanted to address that the fact that Black babies and their mothers were dying at twice the rate of as white folks. And so she opened a birth center in a majority Black neighborhood offering midwifery services as well as medical care. But about 6 months after the center's delivery, a girl who was Alabama's first baby born in a freestanding birth center, the state health department ordered Skanes to shut it down. They informed her that by holding deliveries at the birth center, she was operating an unlicensed hospital, she said. So what do we call that? She became their competitor, right? These hospitals who've monopolized our healthcare as a whole, who have not only limited us to accessing it, but also done everything to fund laws to ban us from seeking it elsewhere. So, as you could tell, where my politics lie here. Another reason I'm so passionate about sharing about birth and why I wanted to share in this format is because I really believe that our reproductive, our how do I want to word this? Our fertility and our reproductive care is something that is within reach. When we look at the many things that capitalism has like dug its claws into to limit us from having options out there, there are some things we can still do, like learning our cycle, like um herbs that, we can look to the history of birthing for this. And as I also continue on the show, I'm going to learn to like be mindful of, you're going to see there's some things that I also am responsible to protect myself and what I promote and advocate for. So you can always reach me at Mother of Pearl LLC at proton.me if there's anything that's more confidential you want to discuss. And I'll leave that at that. None of this is medical advice, legal advice, or otherwise, and I cannot be held liable for any decisions made off what you learn here. So don't go decide anything. We haven't said anything yet on this show that should even inspire a choice about your body yet. But stick around because we will seed that information for you to hopefully enhance your own power over your fertility and reproductive choices. And asterisk. Um, okay, so here we go. Hospital labor and delivery units are shuttering across the nation, including more than 2 dozen in 2025 alone. They could fill gaps, but they're struggling to stay open. They face some of the same financial pressures that I actually don't know this word. Bedevil. I'm gonna have to learn that. New word alert. Bedevil hospitals, bedevil hospitals, labor and delivery units, including payments from insurers that don't cover the full cost of providing maternity care. Boom. Another angle. Like they're so creative, right? So this is why I say we could be creative too, because, people who run these businesses, aka hospitals, see that there was a creative solution and they want to get creative as well. So they're going to go to the insurance companies and say, okay, well, just pay them this amount. This is what we'll say that's worth. And I'll give you what that's looked like for the doula community. There has been a lot of advocacy. I'm in California. There's been a lot of advocacy for doulas to be covered by insurance. However, at this point, a few years in, many doulas, including myself, do not typically accept insurance payment because of the value that they've placed on us not being a livable wage. It is really, really low compared to the amount of time and attention. So our options are either to decline working with these folks, which who are the people that most need Medi-Cal and are people who typically don't have the out-of-pocket funds, or we under-resource ourselves. So that's something I'm personally exploring with other doulas here in the Bay Area is what are the creative solutions to reaching people. And one of them for me last year was figuring out, and again, part of this show's inception is trying to figure out, okay, so how I actually don't want people to depend on doulas. Doulas can actually not save you entirely, but there are hybrid solutions. So, like for one family last year, what I did was support them through the phone and spend a lot of time with their partner to prepare the partner for supporting them. They called me after every time their nurse or OB would come in and kind of check in where they're at and give them, suggestions for the next intervention. They would call me then to hear what's most common, what the evidence is about the decision that's been supported, and then to hold some space for them to just listen to what the right move is for them. So that is a solution. It's not a perfect one, but I think that is why I focus on creativity a lot here, because none of the solutions are going to be perfect, but we still have to find a way to show up and get people support, whether insurance is going to cover it or not. Ooh, okay, pause for the chat here. Thank you, Vibecaster. Bedevil of something bad. Cause great and continual trouble too. Inconsistencies that bedevil modern English spelling. Of a person to torment or harass, he bedeviled them with petty practical jokes. Got it. Thank you. New word alert. We didn't need a sound for that. There's probably going to be a lot of those as I read articles. I just love coming up around new inventions of the English language. Hey Kiddo says, it's such a torn space to wish for the systems to honor the value of doula care and for the need for protection and responsibility to the history and sacredness of doula care. Yeah. We have experienced as doulas. There's actually, like I said, Sister Song has adjusted its language to reflect the rise of doulas. There is a rise in awareness. When I began, I think just in 5 years, so many more people are aware of the word doula and what we can do than were 5 years ago. But with that visibility, also, like I said, we have the system responding to it. So there are the ways that the insurance companies are undervaluing and wanting to pay us. There are the waivers that we're having to sign in recent years. Some of the waivers are very um, antagonistic, I would say. Like they will ask you to, sign off that, I'm not allowed to conflict with what the doctor said, and things that's just like things that, like, a doula exists to help navigate the systems and we're existent for political reasons when it comes to hospital births. So it makes sense that we're not necessarily welcome, but I do think there's going to have to be a major change. And one of the changes I'm considering is not even saying you're a doula going in, because people do have the right to bring in any partner they want into their birth. And if they're going to start asking for, like I had a client who wanted reimbursement from their insurance. And so I don't take payments directly from insurance, but I will give them an itemized receipt. And I do have it's called an NPI number that insurances can log. But what they wanted is like this very specific paperwork for certification, and doulas are not a licensed field. So that's also something you should know. Anybody can be a doula, which is good and, requires discernment. Yeah, I could really be here forever talking about all this, which is, I guess, why I'm going to be here every Wednesday. So let's get back to this here. Nationwide, the number of freestanding birth centers doubled between 2012 and 2022, but more recently, the pressures have taken a toll. About 24 centers have closed since 2023, bringing the total number down to about 395. In November, Pennsylvania Life Cycle Wellness and Birth Center announced it would shut down. It had served Philadelphia for 47 years. Oh my God, I want to cry. I might. So, New Mexico's longest operating freestanding birth center stopped delivering babies in December. This is a general business statistic. Yeah, when a new business opens, within the first 3 to 5, you expect a certain number will close, but long-standing birth centers closing hits particularly hard. Yeah, it does. In California, which has some of the strictest birth center licensing rules, concern over the closure of at least 19 birth centers between 20 and 2024 prompted the state to pass a law to streamline their licensure. Yep, I'm in San Francisco and we have one birth center. One, which you would really expect more from a city like San Francisco that has kind of that crunchy stereotype. Um, an appealing alternative. Okay, freestanding birth centers are not attached to hospitals and aim to provide a more home like, less traditional medical setting. They employ midwives and focus on low risk pregnancies and births. Some Black and Indigenous midwives and doulas say birth centers can be helpful alternatives to their community members. Midwife Jamara Amani of the Southern Birth Justice Network runs a mobile midwifery clinic serving majority Black and Latino neighborhoods in Miami-Dade. This nonprofit, which aims to make midwife and doula care more accessible, recently bought a building for a freestanding birth center. It aims to open up in 2027. Midwifery presents like a luxury concierge type of service. Her goal is to change that and bring it back to the community in a grassroots way. Freestanding birth centers also can be a solution for communities without a hospital nearby. I'm going to pause there because that's kind of the point that I was feeling emerge. And I'm just going to link this in the show notes and we can come back to that. I encourage y'all to read that on your own if you're interested. But the reason I want to pause there where it says freestanding birth centers can be a solution for communities without a hospital nearby is because I think that sums up. Actually, let me go real quick. The next line of this seemed important actually. The closest hospital to the Colville Indian Reservation in northern Washington state is half an hour away, which is actually closer compared to some. I've had rural clients who their closest hospital was a couple hours away. Um, so far, the group has trained nearly a dozen tribal doulas and midwives to serve the area. In the next few years, it plans to open a freestanding birth center. Zachary Teneskit said, Indigenous run birth centers are crucial alternatives for tribal women who also have some of the highest maternal mortality rates and often face prejudice in clinical settings. They don't feel safe, so a lot of them don't get prenatal care. Bringing traditional midwives from our own communities, born and raised in our communities that know the families, we know these babies will be birthed with love. I'm glad that I went back for that piece because that's a big part of the history of birthing in the US as well. And that's going on globally. The way that Indigenous people are prejudiced against in the hospital, and a really, really big thing is having their children taken from them. So there was this very um, well known story of, let's see, I'm gonna just look it up real quick. Oh my god, yay, she got her baby back. Okay. This is why we're looking at this all together, because there was a story of a woman from Greenland living in Denmark whose baby was taken because Denmark, like, I think has colonized Greenland. And so basically, because she couldn't speak Danish, she spoke her indigenous language, they deemed her an unfit mother and the state took her baby. And it had to do with a language barrier. And it was super horrifying. Her name, let's see, I wouldn't say a Greenlandic mother. Ivana Nicoline Bronlund, who was born in Nuuk to Greenlandic parents. Um, yeah, she wasn't allowed to be because of their parenting competence test. So that's really important to name. And I'm going to look at the chat real quick before I kind of move on to the actual question. Oh, being here made me realize I think I actually want a baby. But with the state of the world as it is, I haven't allowed myself to actually want that. Just brush it off as a fantasy or idea. Mm. That, like, this lack of feeling safety. Yeah. Y'all, you are who I knew that I need to keep showing up for. And because y'all that are here know the kind of like chaotic background of my life in some detail and what I've been navigating, it's been really overwhelming to think of a way to show up and share um, while still making the money that I need, just to be really, really blunt about it. Because I've increased my responsibility. I've become like 95% a solo parent and carrying the full financial responsibility of that. And yeah, at the same time, I knew at the end of December, like it's been eating at me of like, how can I share for these people? Because y'all are the ones that not need, but like it's everything is your choice. But with that asterisk, like people like y'all, people who are aware and care and are so creative and just divine, honestly. Um, like we need you as parents and also as, caregivers and just family and village members to these children. But I just knew it just like breaks my heart to hear people write themselves off. And it's so common and understandable to hear people say that they've written off this dream, whether it's for financial reasons or disability or just, a lack of support or village. I know that that is all real. And yet I also know that Native people, Black people, people globally Indigenous people worldwide, people who faced the end of their worlds, apocalyptic endings, people in Gaza, um, have continued to give birth, have continued to choose life and creating life. And I just know that there's another way, and there's so much I have to say about that. I think a lot about. There's this article I read about women in Palestine and how the fact that Palestinian people continue to give birth has been used as a point of genocide denial by Israel, because their point is that if they're, you know, not, if they're still like still giving birth, still growing, how could that be a genocide? And that is why I look to the people of Palestine as like leaders in this in a lot of ways, because the way that I've heard many speak about this faith of that they can't be destroyed, this faith that, and in the way that they call themselves martyrs because they're so connected to their spiritual truth that they're eternal. And I want to handle what I'm saying with care, but there's something in there that's really important in terms of looking to folks who just believe in their own power and believe in something beyond human limitation that is really inspiring. Doesn't seem to do it justice, but I think you get what I'm saying here. Yes. Okay, kiddo. Yes. I'm glad I looked that up right now that she finally got her baby back. So, yeah, and another point there that like there's so many stories that we lose track of to circle back on. So, with all those things we just read, when it comes to the question of where to birth, um, I think oftentimes people So let's just talk about what are the options. So the options for birthing are birthing in a hospital, birthing at home if you live in a state that you can. I'm just going to speak with the assumption that you are in a state where you have the option of home birth right now, and birth centers. So the one I kind of want to eliminate first from the conversation or just address first, is the birth centers, because I think that oftentimes people speak to birth centers as this solution for home versus hospital. Well, let me do a birth center. That's a nice in between. And so, one, that's going to depend on if you're even in an area that has a birth center. So, start there if that's something you've considered. Um, and to the point on here, which is that birth centers can be a solution if you don't have a hospital nearby. That's an important mention. Um, and the reason I said I want to like move that out of the conversation first, or address it first, is because there's also a layer of propaganda on it against home birth that I think people assume that birth centers have something that a home does not. And something you should know about home births is that midwives have a process and as well as a set of tools and emergency response gear things um, that really doesn't make a major difference between a home and a birth center if you're being handled and cared for by a midwife. So by that, I mean a birth center would be a great option for people who, again, are not near a hospital, an option for people who maybe don't have a home that you can birth in. Um, However, if you have a home where the midwife can come to, where you have some comfortable space and privacy, I think the reasons people wouldn't have a home to, I've seen people home birth in apartments. I've had clients that even did a whole big water tub in an apartment, which is also not a requirement. And I've also had many clients who set up the water tub and didn't even birth in it because they didn't want to in the moment. They didn't make it to it, all the reasons. So what I'm trying to get at there is that um, I want to cut through the propaganda that a birth center is going to provide you everything that home birth can't. Because for many people, they might be the same. Because if you are, like I said, in a city like San Francisco, yes, I said it's kind of surprising there's only one birth center. Yet at the same time, the midwives that work here are able, I'm in a city, so they can go to the homes. And first of all, you need to make it to a certain point in your pregnancy in order to birth at home. I think it's in California, I believe it's 36, 37 weeks a gestation. You can do all of your care with a midwife. And if you don't make it, or if there are medical reasons like high blood pressure, low blood pressure, um, gestational diabetes, there's your midwife would have a list of reasons where then as you get closer to the approaching estimated due date, they would say, you know, you're not eligible anymore for the home birth, but oftentimes the midwife will still go with them, attend with them, and will usually have relationships with hospitals. Um, Now, gear that midwives have, resuscitation gear. They have also the AED. I almost said IUD. Midwives also have IUDs, but not for the birthing care piece. Or oftentimes they will. The AEDs, like things to resuscitate. They might carry injectables like pitocin to help encourage contractions if you're in a situation where maybe the placenta needs some encouragement to be birthed. Midwives are highly equipped. They have oxygen tanks. Um, they will usually pull up. I've seen them. They usually pull up and they need a table to lay out all their things. And then they might even have additional things that stay in their car for those purposes. And so the majority of reasons that you would need to transfer to a hospital in case of an emergency, which is a reason most people get scared about home birth, is because they think, well, what if there's an emergency? The majority of emergencies are detectable ahead of within a frame of time that would either transfer you to the hospital, um, or in some emergency cases call an ambulance to transfer you to the hospital quicker. um, the other birthing style that I won't really get too into today is free birth, which is a movement of people who advocate for birthing with no professional present. And what I will say about that is that I would not personally attend as a doula one of those births. It is illegal in many states, which is, you know, I don't think it necessarily should be illegal, but I also don't think we live in a culture where people are connected enough with our bodies and those needs in order to safely do that. And there are um, I'm not an advocate for free birthing. I think there are maybe midwives that have free birth for themselves. There are people who have done it who have really, really prepared for that, and that's their choice. I'm always here for your choice. Um, but also, I'm also here for the safety. So I'm going to also eliminate free birth from the conversation because that's not something that I would necessarily advocate anybody for. And the people who choose it should be far more educated than me about all the physiological aspects of birthing. Um, Now, I'm an advocate for home birth. I think birth is when the pregnancy is normal, and there are markers for that. When you have a healthy, non, what do they call it? Like typical, I'll just say typical pregnancy, it is not inherently a medical event. I don't believe that pregnancy or childbirth is inherently a medical event. There are things that happen that turn it into needing medical response. Um, and a hospital is trained to respond. A hospital is trained to respond to medical needs, and that is very different from being trained to uh, attend and support the unfolding of a birthing process that is uninterrupted and unmedicated. So, because this stream is getting long, I think I'm going to carry this question into next week. But I want to, if y'all have questions specific about the birthing location, feel free to drop it in the chat. But I want to just kind of in brief say that choosing where to birth is deeply personal. There are people who have learned and know everything about childbirth that plan for that home birth, and their midwife may tell them because of this vital, this measurement, this thing that I'm seeing, it would not be safe for you to birth at home. At the same time, there are also people who don't think at all about physiological birth and walk into their birth thinking, well, I'm just going to go in, I'll get an epidural, I'll get a C section if I have to, and that's it. We'll be done with it. And low risk, thank you. Thank you. I'm like blanking on these words right now. There are people who don't prepare anything to go into birth and then may find themselves in a situation where their labor is progressing so fast that they can't make it to the hospital. And to anybody listening, that if you are pregnant or find yourself, even though I said I don't necessarily advocate for planning a free birth, I also think that we should know what to do if we end up with labor progressing so quickly that we don't make it to a hospital. And that's a very real possibility. And if we did not spend any time learning about physiological birth, that can be and likely would be an extremely traumatic experience. And that happens to folks. So, say, just to put it out there, if you were to be in a situation where you ended up birthing alone at home, I would call 911 or emergency response as soon as that baby is out. I would not cut the umbilical cord. I think that's the most important thing I would say, is that if baby is born, stay skin to skin, maybe put a blanket over y'all. You do not need to cut an umbilical cord. You want to hear a sound from that baby. So maybe sometimes they have fluid in them. You want to hear that first cry. So you can pat them until you hear that, but definitely call 911. And that's, just to tell you what free birthers often will do, is if they want to birth alone to protect themselves legally, they will typically call 911 and just kind of pretend that they didn't know. So the reason I say that about you can plan for home birth and not be able to birth there, you could plan for hospital and still end up birthing at home. This is why my approach always comes back to your intuition. It comes back to this ability to trust yourself. I think not holding too firmly to your plans is very important for anyone giving birth, because birth is this dance between you and your baby and the other energies in your atmosphere. And it's unpredictable by nature. That's what makes it so beautiful. It's also what makes it so terrifying in ways. And so the number one thing that people that come and work with me typically say is that I have problems letting go of control. At least that's my type of client, are the people who struggle with this idea that they can't plan everything and that something might be beyond their control. And that is why my approach really centers into this practice of going in within yourself, the birth realm, as I call it. And I'll talk about the birth realm framework and practice next time. But in short, the birth realm was birthed through this process, working with my friend now, Kiki, who hired me in 2021. And I was also practicing Reiki at the time. And she's in the Midwest, I was in California. And every month we were meeting for me to guide her in through this trance experience and visualize her birth realm. And every time we went into that place, because I also, as a medium, was kind of channeling the experience and spirits were coming forward, spirit baby was coming forward, we were able to move through and kind of do this astral work, do this kind of hypnosis type work in this space to make room and to really materialize her comfort of surrendering to an unpredictable process, an unpredictable state of being. And so the outcome of that for her after a year of doing that together, combined with childbirth education, combined with having a physical midwife team, was that she told me after that this place that we were seeing when we were doing these journeys is where she went to when she was in active labor. She saw herself on a beach, wading in the waves, and because she had built such a familiarity with that inner world, it supported her with surrendering, with that high activation state of being to birth her baby. And thankfully, she successfully had the home water birth that she wanted. You know, it's possible that other people's stories, every story is unique. I do spirit baby readings, and just as every spirit baby every reading in that sense is unique in terms of how the baby comes to them, when they might come to them, whether there's babies lined up or there's none lined up and they need to call them in. It's highly individualized what's going to be your path. And the same goes for childbirth. I don't know your contract. There are things like astrology that can point to it. There are things like connecting with your ancestors and divination that can, form beliefs about what this might look like. But as far as I've seen, some people's path might be doing everything right and then something happening that completely shifts the story, and that's how it happens. Some people, it's an outside force that changes it. I don't believe everything is predestined. I've supported people who have had stillbirths. I've supported people who have, navigated things that I would never say were part of what's meant to be, or bypass the intense grief and trauma that can come with that. It's a mystery. There's such a mystery in all of it. And I think that kind of takes me to the closing here today, which is that we're in a state of mystery. And I think that our fate, our destiny is created in collaboration with everything we're connected to. I don't personally believe that the outcome of what's happening right now politically, globally, is written in stone. There's prophecy, there's beliefs, but there's also co-creation and our action and our belief. As a very spiritual person, then studying hypnosis and neuroscience and the idea of like things, I don't know if we could get into all of that, but the idea of where our presence and our focus goes being the only real thing, that kind of sticks with me when I think about what I hope for these times. Is that what I pray for is for more people to place our focus in something generative, in what we can create versus what's being destroyed. And I think the evidence I see of that, that kind of affirms that as a truth for myself, is seeing how desperate empire is to grab our attention or to avoid our attention in the ways that mass media is not talking about major things that are happening, in the ways that celebrity is placed in front of us um, to consume our energy, to consume our focus, to plant disbelief in us that a better world is possible. So there's so much more to say, but I want to keep these streams not too long. Um, I'm going to sit with this and thank you for riding this nonlinear wave with me for the first crowning stream. I'm going to come back to my notes real quick. Opportunities. You can give to the Sister Song Birth Justice Care Fund. They do a lot of great work in Georgia, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Florida. They throw community baby showers. They host a Black Breastfeeding Week and Black Maternal Mental Health Fair. So that will be in the show notes. And let's see what it looks like when I drop a link in. Can you let me know, does that link actually work when I drop it in the chat? Or is it just text? That's what I would encourage folks to give to this week. That is just an thank you for confirming. Cool. So, if you have the ability to give, you can make a donation to the four mothers of the reproductive justice movement. And if you're watching and you are in the Bay Area or know a Black birth worker in the Bay Area, Sister Web has an apprenticeship opportunity. So different from Sister Song, here in SF, we have Sister Web, which is a community, a birthworking community. And I'm going to drop the link to their Instagram post that is offering a paid apprenticeship opportunity for new doulas. So if you're a new doula in the Bay Area that wants to and needs to complete your certification by shadowing prenatal, postpartum, or birth care, you can check out Sister Web's KBC, which is their Kindred Birth Companions, I believe that stands for Kindred Birth Companions. So that is for Black birth workers in the Bay Area and you get $1,000 stipend every month to apprentice under some local Black birth workers. So share that with anyone you know in the Bay Area. And if you would like to go deeper with me, if you are more active in your journey, I offer one-on-one sessions. I have 30 and 60-minute consultations. I do spirit baby readings, and will be launching by the end of this month my pregnancy group and classes for the year. I also am a co-founder at the Church of Soft Power that holds a lot of open to the virtual public gatherings to connect with our creativity, to connect with our bodies and our breaths. I do a group Reiki experience once a month, as well as on our YouTube channel on the first Monday of the month. We have our monthly service. And I believe next Monday we've got Sanctuary Studios Soul Spark Oracle to connect with your intuition. And so everything that goes down at Soft Power, I highly recommend to anyone that is going to be a future parent, is just an artist and a creative person, is already a parent that needs to come back to yourself. That's really what all these spaces are designed for, places to come back to you, coming back to the rainbow of readiness. But what happened to my rainbow? There we are. It's a place where optimal functioning and growth can happen. So if you want to learn how to access this 2 to 4 range, get in this 3 place, go to Soft Power, because that is the place where I get reconnected to my intuition, back to myself. Because, like I said, everything is begging for our distraction and attention and our energy right now. And we have the power to choose where we give it. We have the power to make choices every day with where we want to put our creative energy. And I think by looking at reproductive justice and birth history in the US, what it's truly taught me ultimately is how valuable these systems and institutions and this colonial empire knows our creativity is. There's a reason why when we try to imagine what's beyond policing, um, so many of us get stuck, and it's because the arts programs have been defunded. It's because we've been told not to trust ourselves in this Christian steeped, even if you didn't grow up Christian. A lot of that messaging is about not trusting yourself, about waiting for a savior to come lift us out of this situation. And it's about a whole lot of things I don't really know or care about. But those are the ones that stand out to me that I see as remnants in the culture around us. And that's what I'm here to disrupt, is to just bring it back to you as the creator, whether you decide that's a baby, whether you're nurturing babies. You are the creator of your life. And I'll just end it on birthing is your portal to your power. So go create something, go birth something. It's whether you're birthing a little art project or something bigger. Um, it's just a way of practicing your incredible capability to create. And I think that's what being what I call this material world is like. I like to think of it as just the creative realm. I think that's why we come to Earth. I think that's why I came to Earth, is to be in a physical body, is to be in this tension with material and the physicality of the world, and taking something and creating something else, imagining and accessing our visions and bringing them into reality. So shout out to y'all. Thank you. Love y'all. And I will see you next week. Bye.